All right. Hello, everybody. It's X here, and we are going to just talk about all of the Menagerie previews. I'm not going to bother with the bonus previews because once the set drops, I'm just going to talk about all the cards anyway. So, thought about making a video about all of the Menagerie cards, one day at a time, but I think I would just rather talk about them all at once. So I have included the day one previews, but I am going to put them at the very end in case you've seen the day one previews video that I already made. So you can just skip that part. I don't think I'll have anything new to say. So, well, let's get right to it. So this is a non-supply pile, as it says here. This is not on the supply. This is a horse. There's 30 of these. They cost 3. And it's a one-shot lab, much like Experiment. When you gain a horse, you don't gain another horse, so don't get confused with Experiment. But it's basically a one-shot lab, like Experiment is. So, cards and events will give you horses, as will be seen here. So, supplies here. It's a 2-cost treasure. It's a copper. When you play this, gain a horse onto your deck. And then we have scrap here. Trash a card from your hand. Choose a different thing per one it costs. Plus 1 card, plus 1 action, plus 1 buy, plus 1 coin, gain a silver, and gain a horse. And to clarify with scrap here, you have to choose different things. So you can't use this as like an apprentice. You can't trash a gold and draw 6 cards or something. You can't do that. And in fact, if you trash cards costing more than 6, you really only get 6 options. So it just automatically does all 6 of the options, and it will not do any extra options. And then livery. I assume it's livery or livery. I think it's livery, but I'm not sure. It's a 5-cost action, gives you 3 money, and this turn when you gain a card costing 4 money or more, gain a horse. So let's talk about supplies. Supplies is essentially a peddler with upside. It's very good, in my opinion, but it's not as good as it feels, because you're playing a bunch of horses, so you think you're doing more with your turn than you really are, because you do have the supplies in your deck still at the end of the day. Now the reason it's upside is because, well, you might find other cards with the horse that you top decked, which will help you draw your deck, and then hey, you found your supplies while you drew your deck, and then it just sets up your turn. But if at any point you kind of whiff and you don't find everything, well then it's kind of just a peddler, right? If you find your supplies on your next turn and you kind of whiff, well, then you would have had a peddler effect anyway. It's kind of a weird way to think about it, but I find it helps kind of mitigate the whole horse thing, where you go, wow, I'm going crazy with the horses. But yeah, I almost always get 1 or 2 of these in every kingdom, no matter what, just because it adds to consistency, right? Because having a 6-card hand at the start of every turn is pretty nice. And you're willing to throw in a little, quote-unquote, chaos, right? Because if you're drawing your deck and you got a bunch of extra coppers you could draw and then dud, that's kind of chaotic, right? So I consider supplies like adding a bit of noise to your deck, a little bit of chaos to your deck. But it comes with a lot of upside with the horse. So I think this card's really good. I've definitely played a lot of games where it was my life's goal in a single province game to just get as many supplies as I could. I think this card makes Taxman worth going for, but I'd have to test that out. But I've had quite a few games where I just opened double supplies. I don't know if it was good, but it was like a single province game and there really wasn't anything to do, so I just wanted all the supplies. I don't know if that would have worked. I was just messing around, but it did surprisingly well. But I don't, like, saying that now, that doesn't sound good. So I would be a little skeptical about that. I don't think it's that good. But certainly it is something you should get, like, probably upwards of 3 to 4. I think past 4, like, the chaos of supplies starts getting a little too bad. Because it gets less and less likely you're going to draw your deck, right? So you don't draw your deck and you only find 2 supplies, and then you have to draw these supplies all over again and set them up slowly, and then it just gets harder and harder to draw your deck. So I think the optimum number is somewhere between like 1 and 3, and then past that it starts getting really hard to draw your deck. Of course, supplies also shines really well in decks where you're not drawing your deck, right? So you play your supplies, and then it sets up your next turn, so you do a little bit more extra on your next turn. So supplies is quite nice on those boards too. So yeah, overall supplies is a very strong card. I think you almost always get at least 1 in just about every kingdom. Because, there are a lot of turns where you just hit 3 or you hit 2, and it's like, well, I either buy a silver or this, and I don't really want a silver, so I guess I'll take a supplies. So it's really rare where you just don't have an opportunity to pick up one of these, basically. So this is a card I would definitely keep an eye out for. I don't think it's a game-winning card, but it helps you. It definitely helps, and it's a very good support card. I give it... Maybe we should have a rating system. I kind of just decided to have a rating system just now. We'll give this one 3.5 victory points out of 5. We'll give it 3.5 VP out of 5. Yeah, 3.5 VP. Pretty good. Scrap next. Cost 3. Trash a card from your hand. Okay, we already talked about that. So, Scrap as an opener is really where it shines the most. And again, it's... Remove the S. This card's kind of crap. It's not great. It's not a great card. Like, sure, it trashes, but, like, it's not that great. I will say, it's terrible at trashing copper. You don't want to use this to trash copper if you can help it. If it's your only trasher, you don't have a choice, but if you do have a choice, yeah. You will just trash a state with this card if you can. So, of course, sometimes this will be the only buy. So, haha, sad. The nice thing about Scrap, though, if this is the only buy, is you can use it to gain just in and of itself, right? So you could trash a silver, gain a silver with the trash silver, get 1 action and 1 buy. So these 3 alone make it self-sufficient to where you can just get an automatic buy. And I don't know if you'd have a way to redraw that silver, but at least it's somewhat sustainable there for the buy. So, like, it's not the worst buy card. And it can fuel itself. So there's no, like, trade route syndrome here with Scrap, unless the silver pile runs out, in which case I guess you have horses too. You can trash horses. There's 30 of those. I will also say for opening, typically when I trash in a state with Scrap, I typically want to gain a horse almost every single time, right? Because, you buy experiments a lot of the time. Top level players just buy experiments on turns where they hit 3 in the early game over silver because it's just better. Because it cycles, so having a horse is really, really good. It's probably the best option here, and you almost always want to do it. Other options you can consider are card, coin, and silver. Plus action and plus buy are really like the ones you're going to be using the least in the early game. Plus buy is just, you'll know if you want that, and plus action's mostly if you collide or if you want to play multiple actions. It's more of a mid-game option. But I would say card, coin, silver, and horse are the 4 you want to eye the most, depending on what you want to do with your Scrap in the opening play. Overall, I feel like Scrap's pretty bad. I don't think it's a good card. It's not a game winner. I guess it is because it trashes, and if you ignore trashing, you could lose. But, like, as far as trashers go, like, Look at this horse. Look how sad he looks. Yeah. I give this one, like... I'll give it, like, 2 VP out of 5. Maybe 2.5 VP out of 5. Just because it can trash. It's not very... It's not exciting. It's not a good card, in my opinion. I don't think it's that good. There may be instances where, however, like with boards with, like, say, Wraths or Fortress, where you can trash those cards and then just keep printing horses, print silvers, coins, and buy or something. Like, there might be boards where Scrap can shine like that. But I think for the most part, this card's pretty meh. But it does have a lot of options, so you do have to know what you're doing, and you have to know what you want to do with Scrap. Again, I would eye the horses highly in the early game, just for the acceleration. Okay, now we are on to the third card, Livery. 5 money, gives you 3 cash. This turn, when you gain a card costing 4 or more, gain a horse. Now, I'm not gonna lie. When I first saw this card, I thought, okay, this card's alright. So my first thought was, wow, what? And then I started thinking about it. Pardon me, I'm getting over a sickness. I started thinking about it, and then I kind of thought, okay, 3 money for 5, action is really nice, and then you can get a horse out of this. So, that's pretty cool. And then I actually started playing with Livery, and I realized how fucking broken it is. This thing is insane. This thing can empty the horse pile, which, by the way, is 30 cards. This thing can empty the horse pile fairly often. Just to give you an idea of how, like, crazy this card is. Yeah. You know, it takes action cards. But how many action cards are in most games? Quite a bit, right? And then the money is, like, really nice. So you hit 5, and you get this. And I was thinking, like, well, what 4 costs could I buy to, you know... There's so many, you know, you don't care. It's fine. It all works out. It usually just works out with Livery. Yeah, this is a power card in my opinion. Sorry, excuse me. I think just by itself as a terminal, it's pretty good. I still have to figure out just how strong it is in, like, a single terminal deck versus other cards. Like, I wouldn't play this over Goons as a terminal, but I could see playing this over a lot of other terminals that are considered good. But again, I think that's going to come with more time. But definitely, like, do not sleep on this card. This card is insane. This card is like the Nintendo DS. It prints money of horses. Like, it's incredible. Especially if you can get 2 or 3 of them down, and you can gain multiple cards. You can play this and then start gaining cards. You don't even have to buy cards. It's just gain. So you can play this and then Ironworks and Ironworks. Hey, you get a horse. Cool. So, abuse the fuck out of this card, because it's insane. This card to me is a 4.5 out of 5 VP, I think. Just to start off. Sorry. I think this card's very, very strong. It could go even higher. It could also crash a little bit. But, like, my initial impression is, wow, this is incredible. So, keep your eye on this card. Definitely buy this stock. Alright. Now we are going to... Whoops. Did I not? Okay. Well, you saw all the previews. I'm sure you've seen them all already. Okay, so I didn't save the Exile mat picture. Anyway, so the way Exile works is when you exile a card, it goes to the Exile mat. It's not in your deck, but it's still part of your deck, essentially. So at the end of the game, it counts as part of your deck. So if you exile, say, a province, it's not trashing. It's like basically set aside, sort of like Island. But at the end of the game, it counts as 6 points for your province. It's part of your deck. It's just basically set aside somewhere. Same thing with Curse. You set aside Curse with the exile ability, and it's -1 point still. It's not trashing. It's exile. It's like your own personal little storage. It's your own personal little Dominion storage solution in game, essentially. Exile has another mechanic where if you gain a card, if you have that same named card in the exile mat, you can choose to toss all of the cards from the exile mat or none of them. So let's say we exiled 3 provinces and we bought a province. Let's say we're crazy and we want provinces from the exile mat. So if we bought province, we either can toss all 3 of the provinces into the discard pile, or we can toss none of them. We can't choose 1, we can't choose 2. It's all or nothing, baby. So that's exile. It's a bit confusing to explain, but once you get the hang of it, it's quite easy. So that's basically the exile. It sets it aside on a special mat. And then the special thing about that mat is if you gain a card, any cards of the same name that you have on that mat can be tossed, but it has to be all or none of them. Oh, also, when you exile a card and you unexile a card, meaning it goes into your discard, that is not a gain. So if you exile a card and then you unexile a card, you didn't gain that card. Just to let you know. So if you take a card from the exile, that doesn't work as a gain. So you can dodge Swamp Hag this way or something. It's another way to dodge Swamp Hag. Okay, so, I'll give you an example. Coven. Each other player exiles a curse from the supply. If they can't, they discard their exiled curses. No one gains a single curse here, but they still get them into their deck, but no one ever gains a curse here. Okay, now that we've clarified all the weird exile stuff, let's talk about these cards. So first we have Bounty Hunter, costs 4, and it says +1 action. Exile a card from your hand. If you didn't have a copy of it in exile, +3 money. This card's insane. This card's so good. It's so good that after the initial rush, you might start sleeping on it, weirdly enough, because once the initial high of the money runs out, you start thinking, oh, this card starts sucking. And that's not true, because as soon as you start provincing, as soon as you start graining, Bounty Hunter just tucks those provinces for you. So it's island plus, essentially. It's a non-terminal island, more or less, that instead of VP, and, of course it stays in your deck, but you can tuck away points as you score those points, making your deck more consistent. It's a non-terminal, quote-unquote, trasher. It doesn't actually trash. So don't try and remove curses with this unless you have no choice. So yeah, your first initial, alright, I'm going to set aside an estate, that's 3 money. You set aside an estate a second time with Bounty Hunter. If you already have one in exile, it doesn't print you any money. You don't get any money off of it. So keep that in mind. And that's not that much of a drawback, because by then you have powerful cards in your deck doing other things, usually. So you don't mind that so much. But Bounty Hunter just this is crazy. It honestly, in my opinion, this could have been 2, and it would have been a good card. But now it's just like, I almost always open this card. I feel like it's really, really strong. It's really hard to justify not opening Bounty Hunter now, I think. It really is crazy good. Um, it's probably too good. But yeah, early game, spiking money. Like you set aside an estate, and then you might set aside a copper or an estate, depending on what price point you want to hit. Um, yeah, this card's crazy. So mid game, it whittles out, but don't kill it. Do not get rid of this card unless you plan on getting another one, because it will start shining again once you get into the late game. Because then you can set aside provinces, and then you get more consistent, and then you even get money the first time you set aside a province. Like, this card's crazy. I think I've just about exhausted everything with Bounty Hunter. Okay, let's talk about Stockpile. So Stockpile is basically a gold for 3, which means you can open it. And it gives you a plus buy, because, why not? When you play this, exile it. So when you play the Stockpile, it goes straight to the exile, meaning it's a one-shot. It's basically a one-shot spoils. Except it's not, because when you buy a Stockpile or gain one, you can toss all of those stockpiles in your exile back into your deck. So you can keep getting stockpiles back into your deck, but once the stockpile pile empties and all these go into exile, you have no way of getting them back. Except, of course, if you can unexile cards. But I think Coven is the only one that does this. I don't remember any other cards that do. From the previews, at least. Anyway, so Stockpile... yeah, it's crazy. It's a tempo boost. It does so much. It's so good. It is so good. This is such a good card. It is such a good payload card. I feel like it speeds up games by at least a turn, just by it being in the kingdom. Oh, did I not rate Bounty Hunter? Bounty Hunter's like a 4.5 out of 5 AP. Stockpile, okay, 4 out of 5 AP, sorry. I'll rate 4 out of 5 AP there, first Bounty Hunter. So Stockpile is a really good payload card. Of course, you have to realize Stockpile is also, it's just a treasure. Like, it's not helping you do engine-y things, it's just helping you buy things. So, usually what I do is I open Stockpile, and then once I set it aside, I kind of just forget about the stockpiles for a bit, and then I use the momentum from that first stockpile to just build up my deck. And then once I kind of get more of a handle on things, I start thinking about getting the second stockpile, because then I want payload, right? And it has plus buy, so I don't even have to get buy cards, because it's buy just by itself. So that's usually what I do. I usually open like at least one stockpile. You could possibly open 2, but usually I like stockpile with an action that does something like trash or something. And then I'll play my stockpile. Just wait a bit, build a little bit, do your typical engine-y stuff, and then suddenly I'll just start going for stockpiles. I feel like once you get like past stockpile number 6, they start getting a little clunky for most decks. I feel like 6 is around the magic number of how many stockpiles you ideally want, by then the game sort of ends. Because adding 7 stockpiles to your deck is like, I don't care how good your engine is, it's pretty scary. 6 even is a little scary, but I feel like 6 is the maximum you can get away with without like getting punished for sure, unless you have ways to guarantee your turns like with Wharf and stuff. So yeah, this card though, I feel like it really accelerates games. I feel like it's a must buy in nearly every kingdom. I don't think there's any money shenanigans you can do with Stockpile. Maybe you can. Maybe you can open double Stockpile with the idea of trying to spike gold. And then, like, every once in a while, you can buy another stockpile and toss those 2 stockpiles back into your deck. Like, sort of to seed your shuffles. I can certainly see things like that, but I think this card is just incredible with engines. Like, this enables engines so much. And as such, I'm torn on whether to give it a 4 or 4.5. I'm going to be edgy, and I'm going to say 4.5 out of 5 AP here. I think stockpile is like crucial for just about any kingdom. You'll buy at least one of these, and you'll usually be an open. And if not an open, you will get it fairly quickly. Okay, next we're going to talk about Coven. So my initial impression of Coven was, this is the best Witch variant in the game, except maybe for Old Witch. That was my initial impression. I should probably say what it does, huh? It costs 5, plus 1 action, 2 money. Each other player exiles a curse from the supply. If they can't, they discard their exiled curses. So Coven just starts sending off curses into someone's exile pile. And then, once the curse pile runs out and you play Coven, it dumps their exiled curses. It doesn't dump all of the curses in every exile pile. So there's a bit of a nefarious game you can play here where you know your opponent has a Coven in hand, and you have a Coven in hand, and there's 1 curse left. And you're near the shuffle. If you play your Coven, and you don't trigger your shuffle next turn, he can dump all of those curses into your next shuffle. So maybe you don't play your Coven. Keep that situation in mind, because that is going to fuck so many people over. And that is a situation that I feel like is going to come up quite a bit. Keep that in mind, please. It's just -1 point that you're giving your opponent. You really don't want to have a bunch of junk in your next shuffle. So be careful. So anyway, I thought this was the best Witch variant. I'm kind of relaxing on that a bit now. I think it's still very good, but it does have a lot of strengths, right? Because I feel like +1 action, +2 money is stronger than +2 cards in the early game. But in the late game, this doesn't help you really at all. So this card, there's ideas, right, where in the time it takes you to ship off these curses to your opponent can just play a Megaturn engine and then win. And you wasted your time with these cards. And you would get more than 1. You would get like 2 or 3 probably, because you want to drown them in 10 curses. Of course, if your opponent doesn't go for Covens and it's just like, all right, I dare you to send me play Coven 11 times before I win, and you get there before they win, guess what happens? They take 10 curses into their deck all at once. How are they going to recover from that? So it's a scary game with Coven. Anytime Coven's on the board, it's basically like, hey, do you want to just ignore me? Or do you not want to ignore me? Do you want to ignore? Or do you just play along? And the safe move is to play along. But I feel like the edgy moves are going to be, all right, I'm not playing along. I'm going to ignore Coven on this board. And that is going to be very interesting as we continue to watch Coven. I feel like Coven's a 4 out of 5 VP card. I feel like it's very, very strong, as most Witch variants are. It starts out as a Monument variant, basically, because it just sends out a curse. So it's essentially a Plunder Witch. Not really, because it's not a treasure, but that's essentially what it is. And then on the 11th play, it's the Doomsday Clock hits and then just dumps all of this crap into their discard. So it's a dangerous card. Like, this needs a warning label on it, I think. Next, we're going to talk about ways. Now, ways are quite simple. So when you play an action card, before you do anything the action card says, you may choose instead to play that card as a way. So, let's say Way of the Ox. Alright, I'm going to play my Smithy. Well, before I draw 3 cards, before I do anything with Smithy, I can say, alright, I'm playing this Smithy as a Way of the Ox. So instead of doing the +3 cards, it will now give me 2 actions. And yes, you can throw in a card, play it as a way the first time, and play it as an action the second time, or any other order that you like. I think I covered just about everything. Yes, this also makes Ruins worse, as if Ruins needed another nerf. Now they have another nerf, and that's pretty much most ways, right? Alright, so let's talk about them. Way of the Ox, +2 actions. This card makes terminals redundant. Like, this card makes worrying about them redundant. And it's kind of sad, because like the intricacy of Dominion where, okay, I'm not going to open double of this card. I'm going to just, I have to meticulously build my... Now I can just buy all of the smithies. I can just empty the smithies. And yeah, it's a necropolis, whatever. Like, who cares? Well, now I have 8 smithies. You only have 2. And I don't care, because I can play them as villages. I can play them as shanty towns, essentially. So good luck coming back. So you can slam pile like a crucial draw card like Smithy, for example. Smithy's really the best example, I think, because most draw cards are like 5 or more. And draw is just so important. I feel like Way of the Ox and Smithy might actually be like a dangerous thing to watch out for, but we'll see. I haven't played with the Ways that much. But I feel like this one is very strong, and it will be so relevant it's not even funny. So it's probably a 5 out of 5 VP already. It's probably one of the strongest ways already. Way of the Mole, I feel like this is a really good way as well. +1 action, discard your hand, and then you get +3 cards. Like this one's great too. This one's really good. So, alright, you have it done. Or you trash bunch, or, It's essentially a mini, minion. Right? Like, just think of, but anytime you want. So, you want to cycle? Oh, you want to find your traveler faster? Okay, cool. You just turn your action card into that. And then you cycle to find your traveler. You want to find your trasher? You want to find your steward faster? Okay, well, you can just Way of the Mole and look for it. You can set up, right? You can Way of the Mole, because if you have like a cursed village on top of your deck, you can Way of the Mole, toss that, and then you have a great cursed village. There are so many ways to use and abuse this way that I feel like you should be using this at least once in just about every game. Like, that's how good it is. So I'm going to give this one a 4.5 out of 5 VP, I think. Way of the Turtle is also very interesting. Set this aside. If you did, play it at the start of your next turn. And clarification, yes, you can turtle a card forever. You can turtle a card, set it aside, and then at the start of your next turn you play it. But before you play it, you can choose to play it as a way, and you can choose to play it as a turtle. So you can set it aside for eternity if you really want. And that may come up. That may be relevant at some point. Like if you know that they put down a lighthouse. Well, maybe I don't want to play this mountebank. Maybe I just want to keep setting it aside. So, as to pressure them to keep buying guardians or something. So, like, there's situations where that could happen. Where something like that could happen. So it's not... I don't think it's a thing you would never do. You certainly could consider it at some point. But it should be pretty rare. Now, Way of the Turtle, I think, is deceptively not as good as it looks. Now, it's kind of summon, right? It essentially turns your action into a duration instead, where you play it. It costs an action, but next turn it happens. So you can play this on any cantrip, and it just, it becomes a village for next turn. So this is a village variant in a way. But to keep it rolling, you have to spend an action. So it's also not really a village variant because it costs an action just to do this, and then you could have just not done it instead. So this card's not as good as it looks, but there's just so much you can use and abuse with it again that it doesn't really matter. You can, okay, I drew my deck. Well, I'm just going to turn my Smithy into a Way of the Turtle and then play it next turn. Cool. I can set up my turns. I can go, alright, my turn's doing enough here. I can just set this card aside and use it on my next turn instead. There's just so many uses for Way of the Turtle. Just optimize your turn and make the start of your next turn better. It's kind of crazy. It's also sort of villagey because it costs one action now, but then next turn it doesn't cost an action. So if you're afraid of drawing a card dead, but you do want to draw a bunch of cards, and you're not too particular about how fast you draw them, instead of drawing potential actions dead, you could just Way of the Turtle to draw a card and then draw those next turn. You can use this to spike things potentially as well, especially if you're worried about collision. So if you open Smithy and, I don't know, Smithy and some other terminal action, or even a non-terminal action, because if you're just afraid Smithy on turn 3 will draw that action, you can just Way of the Turtle it, and then hey, you hit Inheritance next turn. So there's deck tracking is going to be paramount with Way of the Turtle. Again, like with Way of the Mole, these two are going to super reward deck tracking and optimal play. So I'm going to give Way of the Turtle here a 4 out of 5 VP. It's a less confident 4 out of 5 VP than Way of the Mole. I feel like Way of the Mole is better, but Way of the Turtle can scale a little bit better, I feel like. But Way of the Ox is just insane. I feel like that's just super good. Okay. Now we're going to talk about some events. So this set has some events. One of them's Toil. Costs 2 money. +1 buy. So when you buy this, you get your buy back. You may play an action card from your hand. So in a way, Toil can become a village. So let's go back. Let's assume Library is in your hand and you drew it dead. You can Toil, play Library. Hey, you just made a net 1 coin, and now everything you buy for the rest of your turn, you gain a horse. That's pretty crazy. Oh, hey, you drew your Coven dead. Well, now I can Toil and play it. I can Toil and play Bounty Hunter. So it has a lot of uses. However, I feel like using Draw with Toil is where it's a little sad. Because unless you're planning on using something like Artificer or something that can toss cards for benefit, you can't play treasures once you've drawn them with Toil because you're in your buy phase unless there's like Villa. So it's a limited village, and you kind of have to learn what you can and can't do with Toil. But you can abuse the hell out of this thing. So I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5 VP. Just already. Because this should be so abusable. It's not even funny. Commerce. 5 money is how much it costs. Gain a gold per differently named card you've gained this turn. So basically Commerce is just a better windfall. Because instead of gaining 3 golds, you could gain less golds. Because you don't necessarily want 3 golds. You might just want 2 golds or 1 gold. And even just getting 1 gold for 5 is like incredible. That's incredible value. So yeah, this card's pretty good, but of course it's still gold. It's not incredible, so there's not really much else to say about this card. Like, if you want gold, you'll probably find a way to abuse Commerce. And Commerce in it encourages engines. I would be careful about gaining 8 golds with Commerce. Try not to do that unless you really want 8 golds for some reason. So I'll give this event maybe a 3 out of 5 VP. I'm leaning towards 2.5 or 3. I'm going to just say 3. Populate. This one feels like a fan card. It doesn't feel like it's a Dominion card. I still think it's so weird. It costs 10. Gain 1 card from each action supply pile. So that's your 10 kingdom cards. And for clarification, you can gain a plunder with this because it checks the randomizer essentially. So the randomizer for encampment and plunder it says it's an action. So it's an action pile. So populate treats plunder as if it's an action supply pile. So any split pile that has an action in it is basically a populate. You can populate it. So keep that in mind. Populate can also gain a bunch of cards like laterally, horizontally. So if you're limited on buys and you want to lower multiple card piles to win, populate is a good way to do that. So if I wanted to lower, say, Fishing Village, Bazaar, and I don't know, another 5 card, well, that's already more than 10, and that costs 3 buys, and populates just 1 buy and 10, and it just does that. Also, you can choose the order in which to gain your populate cards, and you usually will just do random order, but sometimes the order in which you choose your cards will matter, so you can choose the order if you want. You can't choose whether or not to gain a card. You have to gain all of them. So like if there's ruins on the board, yep, you're gaining your ruins. Cool. So this one's really wonky because on one hand, I feel like in a lot of boards it's completely useless. And then I'll play a board where it's donate, feodum, populate with stockpile. And then, hey, I'm populating on turn 4 as player 1, and it's guaranteed. And my opponent literally resigns because there's nothing he can do to win. Like, yeah. On boards where you can guarantee hitting 10, this is a super first player card, and it's absolutely broken, and it will win every game you play. So it's so swingy. It's either literally useless or the most powerful thing on the board or somewhere in between. And it really depends on the kingdom. I might blacklist this one, to be honest, because I don't like this design at all. It's so weird. I don't know. I still have to play with it more. Maybe I'll like it more. It's so weird. It doesn't feel like a Dominion card. All right. So now we're gonna talk about these. Sorry. So, Mastermind, it's a 5 cost. At the start of your next turn, you may play an action card from your hand 3 times. So, it's KC for 5. I mean, there's really not much else to say. It's KC. And it costs 5. Okay, there's a turn delay, but, like, it's still KC. Why does this card exist? Okay, next card. Black Cat. Plus 2 cards. If it isn't your turn, each other player gains a curse. When another player gains a victory card, you may play this from your hand. So, you can Ambassador an estate to your opponent, and then this triggers and you draw 2 cards. That's kind of cool. It doesn't curse the opponent, though. It has to be their turn. It has to be not your turn. And if they gain a victory card and you have this in hand, hey, you trigger this and you play it. And then on the start of your turn, you actually discard Black Cat. So you could draw it again, potentially. But it would be in your discard. So, just letting you know that's how that works. How good is Black Cat? In money games, I feel like it's pretty good. I feel like you can get away with getting 3 of these. Or 4 of these or something. And then it's just a roulette wheel of who gets unlucky and finds a black cat in their hand, or who doesn't. In engines, I can't see getting this unless you really want draw. It feels like a weakish card to me. Did I rate? I didn't rate populate. Probably 4 out of 5 VP, honestly. It's just such a strong effect. Mastermind, 5 out of 5 VP, no question. I would rate 6 out of 5 if I could. Okay, Black Hat. So, yeah. I feel like it's weak. But, I will say, I will report, I played Son of Onto against JSH, who played Black Cat Money. It was like a single province board, and it was basically either Son of Onto or Black Cat. He went hard for Black Cats, and I went for Son of Onto, and he crushed me. So, Black Cat beat Son of Onto, so he's a hero. He's a hero in my heart, even if he's a 2.5 out of 5 VP score. Maybe even 2 out of 5 VP. Like, let's draw. I guess you'll get draw. Whatever. Alright. The next card here, Wayfarer. Cost 6. Plus 3 cards. You may gain a silver. This has the same cost as the last other card gained this turn, if any. So, let's say you have 6 money and 2 buys. I'm going to buy a silver. Oh, Wayfarer costs 3 now. So this is a better than Smithy card with an absurdly easy way to get it for cheaper than Smithy. Like, okay. Cool. You can play Young Witch, hand your opponent a curse, and now Wayfarer costs 0. You can pop a lamp. Hey, you gained 3 wishes. They all cost 0. Wayfarer now costs 0 for the turn. Well, until you gain something else. You can play Wayfarer, gain a silver. Hey, now it costs 3. So, tracking Wayfarers, whatever you're gaining, tracking what Wayfarer will cost will matter in some remodel games and such. But I think the biggest story here is just how easy this card is to abuse, and that it's just payload and draw all in one. Like, I think this is already just a 4.5 out of 5 VP. Like, it's one of the best draw cards in the game, I think, already. Just by itself. Just because of how much it can do. Whoops. I didn't mean to do that. Just because of how much it can do. I think this card's absolutely insane. Also, I feel like it's way overpowered. Like, I feel like it's really, really good. Alright. And this is the point where you can click away. Because there's nothing, I'm not going to talk about anything else but these 5 cards. So, Snowy Village. Plus 1 card, plus 4 actions, plus 1 buy. Ignore any further plus actions you get this turn. And it costs 3. So, I feel like this card is bad. I'm going to say bad. But that comes with a caveat. It comes with an asterisk. If you draw this card late, it's good. If you draw it early, it's really bad. This hurts so much. Champion actually does not help. Villagers do not help. So you have to play this as late as possible. So if you draw it early and you need a village, oh shoot, I have 3 draw cards in my hand and my only village in hand is Snowy Village. Well, I have no choice but to play Snowy Village now. And you could have done so much more on your turn, but you can't. So, this also makes cards like horses and any cantrips just absolutely dreadful. So beware this card on boards where there's a lot of peddlers variants or cantrips or whatever, or whatnot. Be careful, because this will fuck you. And it will fuck you. It fucks me at least once a game. every time I have it. And I combine it with villages. I feel like you never want more than one. Maybe two if your deck is big. Now, if we're playing a massive deck with like 40 cards or 30 cards or whatnot, and it's just kind of like a mixed, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just winging it, I could see picking up like 3 or 4 of these. And it's fine, because you're not going to do more than play like 4 actions anyway. So it's perfectly fine. This is a really weird village. I'm going to say it's a 2 out of 5 VP. It certainly can shine. And the buy is relevant. So, okay, maybe a 2.5 out of 5 VP. But I feel like its downsides are so scary, and it's so easy to get those downsides that I just don't think it can overcome that. Next up is Sheepdog. Cost 3. Plus 2 cards. When you gain a card, you may play this from your hand. This card is pretty cool. And I think it's weaker than it looks. What do I mean? Well, let's say you're playing something like an Ironworks Sheepdog deck, right? I'm just going to gain a bunch of Sheepdogs, and then Ironworks gain a bunch of actions and Sheepdogs, and then draw with all the Sheepdogs. Alright, so if you play an Ironworks and gain a Sheepdog, and you react to Sheepdog, and you draw the Sheepdog, you can react that Sheepdog too. You can just react all of the Sheepdogs while you're still reacting them, and you're drawing cards, for the record. So, just to let you know, you can do that. So you can draw your whole deck just off of one reaction off of one game. This is terrible in the buy phase, so you want to gain a card during your action phase. Because if you do it in the buy phase, because if you're buying a card, you can't play more treasures that you're drawing. Maybe that's cool with Toil. Maybe that works out here. Maybe it works out in some other situations, but otherwise it seems usually quite bad. So Sheepdog really wants you to gain cards during the action phase. Ideally. I think you might be able to do... I wonder if you could do some sort of a loop with Vampire and Sheepdog. If you have some support, right? So you could, in theory, exchange a Vampire into a Bat, draw the Bat, by reacting the Sheepdog gain thing, using night cards. Like, I don't know, like a Devil's Workshop or something. And then react the Sheepdog, draw the Bat. Bat kills something, and then it exchanges into a Vampire. It's really wonky. It might not be feasible. But I wonder if you could do something like that if there was 2 night cards on the board. Like Devil's Workshop and a Vampire. You play your Vampire, and then you Bat trash and immediately get your Vampire back. That seems pretty likely, actually, of a thing you can do. Notice it won't work because you don't exchange until after you gain the card, so you would need outside support. And Vampires themselves can gain cards. So maybe, if you just have 2 Vampires and 2 Sheepdogs in hand, maybe that's enough. Because then you can just empty the Sheepdogs. Maybe you can do that. That's... Oh, man. There's so many broken things you can do with Sheepdog, potentially, that are, like... This is going to be... I feel like Artificer Sheepdog is a really good thing, too. Like, Artificer just combos with any blue dog. So it's not just Faithful Hound. Now I think it's Sheepdog. I have to test it, but I feel like it's going to be really good with Sheepdog. You could toss 3 cards, top deck a Sheepdog, react to Sheepdog, and react to Sheepdog, and you just drew 4 cards after tossing 3 cards. And you're mid-turn gaining, so, like, it's incredible. Now, having said all of that, Sheepdog kind of sucks. I know. You're like, what? It's plus 2 cards. And it's terminal. And you need to gain a card to get the reaction thing off. And you usually start with a 5-card hand. So before going nuts with the Sheepdogs, just remember that you're drawing 5 cards a turn, and that is your biggest hindrance for Sheepdog. Don't try and gain all 10 Sheepdogs unless you can absolutely guarantee, without a doubt, that you can gain a card and react them all. If you can't do that, if you cannot do that, I would not get 10 Sheepdogs. I would get a more reasonable amount of Sheepdogs, like 2 or 3. That being said, 2 or 3 Sheepdogs are very powerful. Just don't go overboard. And it will be so easy to go overboard because you get an engine head mode where, like, alright, I'm going to click on all the cards. Just be careful. Because this card has burned me, and I've seen it burn other people. And it's so easy to get burned by this card. So, when I give it a 4 out of 5 VP, just understand, it's very easy to get burned by Sheepdog. And it really depends on your starting hand. It super depends on your starting hand. Alright, now we're going to talk about Animal Affair. So, cost 7. 4 money, plus 1 buy per empty supply pile. Instead of paying this card's cost, you may trash an action card from your hand. So, Animal Affair. It's a really good payload card. It's a very good payload card. Of course, it's terminal. But the buy often pops up because there's usually a pile that empties. And, trashing an action card to get a payload card, it's pretty easy to pick up a Pearl Diver mid-turn and just trash that, right? It's not hard. Ruins can be trashed into Animal Fair. Like, the cost isn't that much. It just doesn't cost that much to trash an action card, especially if you can mid-turn gain it. That being said, I don't know that I want this card ultra early. It's hard to get ultra early. Yes, you can kill your Necro for Animal Fair, but that might not be recommended. It really depends on what you want to do with the kingdom and how many villages there are. So, you have to be careful. That being said, it's a pretty strong card. It's a pretty strong card. Just playing 2 of these is a province. And potentially 2 buys or 4 buys. And it's easy to pile this card. If you have a billion buys and tons of actions in your hand, you can just trash an action to gain an Animal Fair. Over and over again. So this card can also potentially pile, especially since it supplies buys by itself. And it can supply an absurd amount of them. It can supply 2 buys. Or if you're playing multiplayer, it can supply even more than that. Like, but we don't talk about multiplayer, So, yeah, this card can get nutty. But it needs support to get nutty. By itself, it's pretty good. It is pretty good. I'm gonna say I'm feeling a 3.5 out of 5 VP for this one. Because at the end of the day, it's still just a payload card. But it is a pretty good payload card. I would just treat it as such. Okay. Next is Kiln. Kiln costs 5. Plus 2 money. The next time you play a card this turn, you may first gain a copy of it. So, this is a crazy card gain variant. It needs a lot of support. It needs a board with a lot of actions. But yeah, you can basically print King's Courts with this. You can print possessions with this. You can print anything you want that you play first. You can play a treasure card first. You can play a knight card first, and it will ask you if you want to have a copy of that. So keep that in mind. I don't think currently there's no way to play province, so don't go looking for that. But anything else you can play, yeah, you can gain it. Pretty good. I feel like it's a bad first 5 though to get. It's like a second or third 5 you get. And the earlier you get it, the more dice rolly it is. If you connect it with another card and you have a plus action, it's insane and it can just win games. But if you don't, you start tripping because you're not gaining a great card with Kiln. And, like, do you really want another silver when you play the silver? Or whatever card you play next? So I think Kiln requires patience. But there are definitely scenarios where getting greedy with Kiln will work and it will beat you. So keep that in mind. It might be worth getting a little greedy with Kiln on some boards. It really depends, and I'm not sure yet. I need to play with this card more, I think. But I'm feeling a 3.5 out of 5 VP here, I think, for Kiln. Now, Barge. Barge, a lot of people say it's fixed wharf. I think it's closer to an orange smithy, and I think it's better to just imagine it as an orange smithy. Because if you start thinking of this as wharf, you're going to just start clicking on this card like it's wharf, and that's not how you play Barge. If you play Barge like that, you will lose. It will just happen. You will lose. So it costs 5, either now or at the start of your next turn, plus 3 cards and plus 1 buy. So you either get a smithy with a buy now or next turn. If you get it now, it's not a duration. If you get it next turn, it stays in play, and you don't get to play it from your deck because it's in play. So, Barge, it's just plus 3 cards for 5 with a buy on it, with the ability to play it next turn instead. This is not Wharf. This is not even close to Wharf in power. So, I made a mistake. I made this my first 5 on like most boards where there were really good 5s, where Wharf would have been a better 5, but this wasn't a better 5 than those cards. So I would get killed a lot. So I feel like this is a trap card. I feel like this card's not half as good as it looks because we associate 5-cost draw cards with Wharf. This is not Wharf. Now, a lot of people are saying this is strong, and it is. Because you can get Haunted Woods draw with a plus buy with this Barge. Again, it's like Way of the Turtle, sort of. You can decide whether to draw now or next turn. Typically, if you have a turn still to go and you want to maybe find another Barge or another action or something, you draw. If you think your turn's coming to an end, you just tuck this for next turn, because there's no reason not to make your next turn more consistent. So in that sense, it's quite good. Usually I feel like you play with odd numbers of barges rather than even, because you want to draw with 2 barges. Alright, so you play 1 barge as your duration. It goes into play next turn. You play 1 as your draw for every turn, and then you play 1 as the duration for the next turn. And then if you want to draw more cards, okay, well, yeah. I feel like you have to, if you're going to use Barge as like a guarantee thing, you have to commit 2 barges at any one time to that thing. And if they're sitting out there, they're not things you can play every turn. They're only things you can play once every 2 turns, which is not nearly as good. It's actually less value. But if you're already drawing your deck, it's more value. But if you're not drawing your deck, it's less value, because you're playing your Barge less often. So I feel like this card's a trap. Wharf does just both, right? Wharf draws now and it draws next turn. It's insane. Well, Barge only draws 1 turn that you choose. And of course, don't underestimate the plus buy. The plus buy is quite good. But you don't get the plus buy on both turns. You only get it on the turn you choose to play the Barge. So again, I have to reiterate, this is not Wharf. Do not think of this as Wharf. It will lose you so many games if you treat this like it's Wharf. Treat it more like it's a smithy with upside. Just treat it like it's a smithy with plus buy. Will you buy a smithy? Yeah, who wouldn't? Smithy's draw's good. But it's not Wharf good. So I'm going to give this one a 3.5 out of 5 VP, I think. Alright, that about wraps it up. Thanks everyone for watching. Wow, this took an hour. and I'm not going to cover the bonus previews. I'm just going to cover all of the other cards once the set actually comes out. So, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you then.